And bad morning to you. This is episode 46 of Bad Morning News, sponsored by Brave Browser, the ad resistant, tracker resistant browser, and you, our patrons. Or for those of you who are our patrons. This is the 24th of September 2018, and we have a wide range of stories today, most of which are largely from the US and Britain, but we've got some good ones. Let's see, where shall we start? Let's go with that Zero Hedge article you highlighted, mate.
Sure.
Oh, actually, I think I put it in there,
It's
but
the
one for
about the second
Rosenstein.
cabinet. Oh, okay. Oh, that's the last one you put in.
Well, actually, there's a Zero Hedge one that's further up the list.
Okay. Okay, I got it. All right, this is from Zero Head. Dean proposed secret recording Trump invoking 25th Amendment by Tyler Durden on Zero Hedge. If this latest revelation from the New York Times doesn't drive President Trump to fire Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein or convince Congress to impeach him, then we can't imagine what would. In a shocking report citing a bevy of anonymous DOJ officials, the New York Times recounted on Friday an aborted mutiny attempt organized by Rosenstein, who allegedly tried to organize members of Trump's cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment to oust Trump from office. In an attempt to persuade the clearly reluctant members of Trump's cabinet, Rosenstein suggested that he or other officials should secretly tape Trump to expose the chaos. He said he was engulfing the West Wing. According to New York Times, the sources were either briefed on Rosenstein's plans or learned about it from the files of former FBI Director Andrew McCabe, who was fired after being disgraced by an inspector general investigation. ABC News, which also reported the story, cited sources familiar with McCabe's files. A grand jury is also weighing whether to press charges against McCabe for allegedly misleading the inspector general. Mr. Rosenstein made the remarks about secretly recording Mr. Trump and about the 25th missions with other men and FBI officials. Several people described the episodes insisting on anonymity to discuss internal deliberations. The people were briefed either on the events themselves or on memos written by FBI officials, including Andrew McCabe, then the acting bureau director, that documented Mr. Rosenstein's actions and comments. None of Mr. Rosenstein's proposals apparently came to fruition. It is not clear how determined he was about seeing them through, though he did tell Mr. McCabe that he might be able to persuade Attorney Generals Jeff Sessions and John Kelly, then the Secretary of Homeland Security, and now the White House Chief of Staff, to mount an effort to invoke the 25th Amendment. According to the New York Times, this all happened during the spring of 2017, shortly after Trump cited a letter that Rosenstein had penned criticizing former FBI Director James Comey's handling of the Clinton probe as justification to fire Comey. Rosenstein reportedly felt he had been used by the president as an excuse to fire Comey. Rosenstein soon began telling colleagues that he would ultimately be vindicated for his role in Comey's firing. Around the same time, he began to express his displeasure with Trump's handling of the hiring process for Comey's replacement. The president's reliance on his memo caught Mr. Rosenstein by surprise, and he became angry at Mr. Trump, according to people who spoke to Rosenstein at the time. He grew concerned that his reputation had suffered harm and wondered whether Trump had motives beyond Comey's treatment of Mrs. Clinton for ousting him, the people said. A determined Mr. Rosenstein began telling associates that he would ultimately be vindicated for his role in the matter. 1 week after the firing, Rosenstein met with McCabe and at least 4 other senior Justice Department officials, in part to explain his role in the situation. During their discussion, Rosenstein expressed frustration at how Trump had conducted the search for a new FBI director, saying the president was failing to take the candidate interviews seriously. A handful of politicians and law enforcement officials, including McCabe, were under consideration. Rosenstein also tried to recruit some of his would-be co-conspirators to surreptitiously record Trump in the Oval Office. Rosenstein then raised the idea of wearing a recording device, or wire, as he put it, to secretly tape the president when he visited the White House. One participant asked whether Rosenstein was serious, and he replied animatedly that he was. However, although Rosenstein appeared conflicted, regretful, and emotional during what can only be described as a coup attempt against a sitting president, even the paper admit that his conduct in attempting to solicit the illicit wiretapping of a president was extremely reckless and unwarranted, and that if uncovered, it could be used as grounds to fire Rosenstein. And so there's a little more to that, mostly talking about Rosenstein, but I think we have some other updates hopefully on that. So if you want to jump in a few updates there.
I'm going to hit up with another one that kicked off from Real Clear Politics. And basically, the New York Times' article has thrown this guy under the bus, literally. Two big takeaways from the Rosenstein bombshell: commentary by Charles Lipson of Real Clear Politics, September 24th, 2018. What should we make of the New York Times' shocking story that Rod Rosenstein, the second highest official in the Department of Justice, wanted to wear a wire, secretly record President Trump, and gather evidence to oust the president via the 25th Amendment? Rosenstein had effectively admitted that he did say something like that, but he has termed it a scathing sarcasm, mocking colleagues who pushed him to investigate Trump more aggressively. All this happened when the administration was young and Rosenstein had only been in office a couple of weeks. The Times story has huge implications, both for its substance and its provenance, who leaked it and why. The two most important takeaways are these. First, the insiders who tried to nail Trump before the election and afterwards are now turning on each other as they try to wriggle out of their own criminal exposure. Second, the leak sets a dangerous trap for Trump. He is bound to be infuriated and might be tempted to fire Rosenstein before the Senate votes on Brett Kavanaugh for Supreme Court Justice, and before the American people vote in November. Walking into that trap would be political malpractice. Let's take a closer look at each implication. At this stage, we don't know who leaked the damaging comments. We do know that they must have come from a top law enforcement official present at very contentious meetings with Rosenstein. Parts may have come from a one-on-one meeting between Rosenstein and Andrew McCabe, who was the FBI's second-in-command and whose boss, James Comey, has just been fired. These are the same insiders from Loretta Lynch's DOJ and Comey's FBI who cleared the gonna-be President Hillary Clinton of her legal liabilities and then tried to pin those liabilities on her opponent. The weapon against Trump was America's most powerful counterintelligence surveillance capabilities. Those are supposed to be used only against suspected spies and require warrants from a secret court created by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, hence FISA. These safeguards broke down because they were deliberately and cleverly evaded. Well, cleverly may be a bit pushing it, but hi. To get the court's authorization, top DOJ and FBI officials relied on opposition research paid for by the Clinton campaign and the DNC, without clearly informing the court about their biased source. Instead, they hid vital information in an indirectly worded footnote. They failed to tell the court that key supporting evidence, a news article, actually came from the same source. It wasn't additional evidence at all, nor did they disclose that the FBI had officially severed its ties to this source for leaking, but that the DOJ's Bruce Orr was still meeting with him and providing the Bureau with his information. They apparently failed to tell the FISA court that the subject of the warrant, Carter Page, had willingly cooperated with U.S. authorities when they had asked to interview him. All this is sleazy and dishonest at best. More likely, it was fraud on the court and evidence of a coherent plot inside senior law enforcement and intelligence agencies to effect an American election and then undermine a duly elected president. If so, those are truly high crimes against America, whether you like President Trump or not. There's significant more to this article, but I'll be quite frank. I think at this point, it's probably worth other people read it because the article itself is just basically put forward a claim of treason. And to be fair, there is an argument for this, especially if it's the Steele dossier that's in use. It's from a foreign source. It's been designed to undermine and effectively help overthrow the current government, and it is largely invalid from all official claims that aren't part of that haven't been using it and leaking it repeatedly. There's loads of reasons to consider it badly sourced as well. It's not really an official document. If you've read it yourself, you'll see just how terminology is used. It's not formal. It's not anything that would be really considered a proper government document. And the fact that it's been used as the only source of information with regards to Russian collusion that can be trusted seems a bit off given its lack of credibility, validity, or anybody who's actually said, yeah, this is a legitimate document and I agree that these things happened. So it's at the moment, a lot of people are traveling a very thin line. Rosenstein's just on the tip of the iceberg, basically, because he pushed forward with the idea of tapping Trump and trying to get him basically ousted under the 25th Amendment. And it's basically trying to use the Constitution to subvert the government. And some people might consider that to be treason, including Trump. And I wouldn't necessarily fault them for that analysis. I wouldn't necessarily say it's correct either to make those claims, but I can understand where they come from. What are your thoughts, Cryptic?
Yeah, no, I mean, again, it's just funny to see this kind of just internal fighting between, I guess what many were calling the state and the deep state. Um, I don't, I haven't followed this too much. I guess it's pretty new also, but it'll be interesting to see where this goes. But as you said, I wouldn't, be surprised, or I wouldn't, fault Trump for, potentially, um, you know, yeah, accusing this guy of treason or whatever. Because I mean, that's what it is under the rules that are in place as of now. So I mean, he's within his ability to do that, I suppose.
Yep, and I mean, I read I saw a repost of something from Twitter by Jordan Peterson, who said that Google was effectively committing treason if it was trying to use propaganda to bias the November elections, and against the government. Now that's a little bit more lopsided. It really does depend what they use to bias the elections. If they try and say that Trump is guilty of Russian collusion, that might be something that creates part of a problem for them, because the only information that backs that claim up in with any significance is the Steele dossier, and that's funded by a foreign government. It was disseminated effectively as propaganda, and as such, it's going to cause real problems if they basically double down upon it, especially if people start getting tried for high crimes against the government. And that kind of thing, well, to be honest, it may need to be done at this point. There are a lot of people who are just simply fed up with it. It's driving me a little bit crazy, to be honest. It's problematic, to say the least. We've got a major something seriously fishy smelling in the state of Denmark, as it were, and we've got to deal with it. There's not much else that can be done. I really don't know exactly how we can push this forward. if except for Rosenstein to resign. And there are broadcasts right now actively. This is something that I'm keeping an eye on as we speak. For the past few minutes, all sorts of corporations are coming out saying that he's expected to leave, that he's going to be fired, that he expects to be fired, that he's going to resign. There's no unity around what is actually going on this.
Yeah, definitely one to watch. But I think we've covered most of what's out there right now about it.
And to that end, there's another big piece that's coming out from US politics around Kavanaugh. A second Kavanaugh accuser has emerged. This is from Zero Hedge by their Tyler Durden account, which is basically their version of an anonymous post. Second Kavanaugh accuser emerges alleging sexual misconduct. Feinstein demands hearing canceled. A second woman has come forward to accuse Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh of sexual misconduct, this time when he was at Yale University during the 1983-84 academic year, according to a new report by Ronan Farrow of The New Yorker. The woman, Deborah Ramirez, 53, claims Kavanaugh waved his penis in her face during a drunken dormitory party and, quote, caused her to touch it without her consent as she pushed him away. For Ramirez, the sudden attention has been unwelcome and prompted difficult choices. She was at first hesitant to speak publicly, partly because her memories contained gaps because she had been drinking at the time of the alleged incident. Her initial conversations with The New Yorker, she was reluctant to canonize Kavanaugh's role in the alleged incident with certainty. After 6 days of carefully assessing her memories and consulting with her attorney, Ramirez says that she felt confident enough of her recollections to say that she remembers Kavanaugh had exposed himself at a drunken dormitory party, thrust his penis in her face, and caused her to touch it without her consent as she pushed him away. Ramirez is now calling for the FBI to investigate Kavanaugh's role in the incident. I would think an FBI investigation would be warranted. Specifically, Ramirez recalls a penis being in front of my face, and that despite being inebriated, someone encouraging her to, quote, kiss it. Despite acknowledging significant gaps in her memory of the evening due to being incredibly drunk, Ramirez then recalls someone yelling down the hallway, Brett Kavanaugh just put his penis in Debbie's face. That seems a bit of an odd thing to shout out. There's more quotes specifically from the New Yorker. Meanwhile, lawyer Michael Avenatti, best known for representing adult entertainer Stephanie Clifford, said on Twitter that he represents a woman with incredible information regarding Judge Kavanaugh, and this client is not Ramirez. In response, Kavanaugh issued a statement saying that this alleged event from 35 years ago did not happen. The people who knew me then know that this did not happen and have said so. This is a smear, plain and simple. I look forward to testifying on Thursday about the truth and defending my good name and the reputation for character and integrity I've spent a lifetime building against these last-minute allegations. Meanwhile, White House spokeswoman Carrie Kuprick said in a statement, this is a 35-year-old uncorroborated claim, is the latest in a coordinated smear campaign by the Democrats designed to tear down a good man. This claim is denied by all who was said to be present and is wholly inconsistent with what many women and men knew Judge Kavanaugh at that time in college say. Predictably, the entire hearing narrative has now been thrown into disarray, and late on Sunday night, Dianne Feinstein tweeted that Thursday's hearing should be canceled in light of a disturbing new allegation of sexual misconduct against Brett Kavanaugh. The FBI must investigate all allegations. Feinstein sent the following letter to Chuck Grassley. I am writing to request an immediate postponement of any further proceedings related to the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh, Feinstein wrote. I also ask that the newest allegations of sexual misconduct be referred to the FBI for investigation, and that you join a request for the White House to direct the FBI to investigate the allegations of Christine Blasey Ford, as well as these new claims. Her conclusion, it is time to set politics aside. We must ensure that a thorough and fair investigation is conducted before moving forward. And that's the end of the article. Now, I'd just like to highlight that last statement, though. It's important that we set politics aside and do what she wants to do politically. That is a fair assessment of that last statement from my perspective, because It's basically saying, shut up and do what I want you to. It's not actually saying that there is a potential that one should be presumed innocent until proven guilty, and that to spend the FBI's time on this may be bad resources. Perhaps the local police that were involved in the situation should be the ones that are taken into account for this, just potentially. Or alternatively, there's a number of reasons why one shouldn't use the FBI. I think it's worth you covering the biggest one that we found recently, Cryptic.
Which article was that?
It was the one from the Free Thought Project about how the FBI gets its informants.
Oh yeah. Oh yes.
Because this one is just gold.
Yeah, this is from the Free Thought Project by Rachel Blevins. FBI made innocent man's life a living hell, told him they would stop if he became a snitch. A man claims he was placed on the FBI's no-fly list with no explanation and told he could be taken off of it if he accepted a job as an informant. Portland, Oregon. A federal appeals court has ruled that a man can move forward with his lawsuit alleging that he was placed on the no-fly list in the U.S. because the FBI was trying to convince him to become an informant. Yonis Fikr is a Muslim American man who initially filed a lawsuit in 2013, 3 years after he was placed on the no-fly list, with no explanation and no evidence against him. He was then mysteriously taken off of the list in 2016 and his lawsuit was dismissed. However, Fikr's case was revived this week by the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in Portland, Oregon, which acknowledged that although the FBI did take Fikr off of the list, that action alone did not completely and irrevocably eradicate the effects of the alleged violation or violations. In addition to criticizing the fact that he was placed on the no-fly list in the first place, Fikr is also claiming he was approached by FBI agents who told him that he would be taken off of it if he agreed to become an informant, and that being on the list for 6 years with no explanation or due process demonized him in the eyes of friends and family. We're hopeful that the lower court will see the no-fly list for what it is, a gross transgression of fundamental rights, said Gadir Abbas, a lawyer for Fikr, who noted that the overall goal in the case is to keep other innocent Americans from being subjected to the same treatment. One of Fikr's most notable claims is that he was detained and questioned by FBI agents after a business trip to Sudan in 2010, and he was told that he had been put on the no-fly list, but his removal could be secured if he agreed to become an FBI informant. As a report from Reuters noted, Fikr said he was on a business trip in April 2010 in Sudan, where he had a family and had told U.S. Embassy officials of his presence when two FBI agents questioned him about his ties to the As Sabr Mosque in Portland, where he had attended prayer services. He said one FBI agent told him he had been put on the no-fly list, but could be removed and given substantial compensation if he became an informant. Fikr said he refused. Because he was not allowed to return to the United States, Fikr eventually sought asylum in Sweden in 2012. He is now concerned about the fact that he was never given an explanation for why he was placed on the list or suddenly taken off of it, and there is no guarantee that he won't be placed on it again in the future. Now, the Ninth Circuit Appeals Court is acknowledging that Fikr has a legitimate case and that the FBI should be held accountable for its actions. In a decision, the three-judge panel wrote, Absent an acknowledgement by the government that its investigation revealed Ficker did not belong on the list and that he will not be returned to the list based on the currently available evidence, Ficker remains, in his own words, stigmatized as a known or suspected terrorist and as an individual who represents a threat of engaging in or conducting a violent act of terrorism and who is operationally capable of doing so. All right. So let's see. Yahoo Travel compiled a list in September 2015 of 8 things an individual might have done that could lead to their name being added to the FBI's no-fly list. Being suspected of direct terrorist activity, traveling to the wrong country, making comments that are not politically correct, having a similar name to someone on the no-fly list, turning down an offer to become an FBI informant, a clerical error by the FBI, outstanding warrants from law enforcement not related to aviation activity, controversial social media posts. So, yeah, I mean, that's how they get their informants, is by just randomly adding them to the no-fly list and arbitrarily deciding that they're a threat if they don't agree to be their snitch.
Yeah, precisely. So we should. This is part of the reason why I wanted that brought up. Was we're all being told it's the FBI that must investigate all of this stuff. And yet, at the same breath, the FBI is willing to put you on lists just so that you'll snitch on whomever they want you to. In this case, your local community. In the next case, it could be your boss, your significant partner. It could be anything, to be quite frank. And you'd hope to assume that it'd only be for something that actually has to do with criminal enterprise, but given the fact that they're being used actively within politics, I'd say that's not really necessarily the case anymore. And this specifically is just yet further examples of how they will utilize, well, let's put it this way. If you're being a bit of a shitlord online, then you could be put on a no-fly list, according to the FBI. Because if you're saying things that are not politically correct, you could be put on a no-fly list. That, to me, sounds retarded, but then again, I don't really have the same perception of things as the people who come up with these lists. But hey, what can you do? It's the only thing that can be done is, unfortunately, bringing down the system as it stands at the moment. And thankfully, I'm hoping that this Rosenstein situation will become a part of that. I expect a resignation. Whether or not it stays at that, I have no idea. But if he had any brains, he would resign at this point because he's going to be screwed otherwise. But let's leave America for the time being, and let's quickly go over to jolly old Blighty, where I am at the moment. Because right now, we've kind of got two major paths here in Britain that we're looking at. One is called the Chequers Plan, and the other one's just the World Trade Organization. And according to the Mail Online, Tory Brexiteers are piling pressure on May as they back report warning Chequers Plan would make it impossible to do trade deal with the US. Hardline Brexiteers helped launch the report, making case for a Canada-style deal. Boris Johnson said the think tank's rival plan to Chequers was very exciting. It comes as Mrs. May pleaded for Tories to remain united as pressure grows. The PM is facing growing cabinet unrest at the Chequers plan for relations with the EU. Boris Johnson ramped up the pressure on Theresa May today as he hailed a report warning her the Chequers plan would make a trade deal with the US impossible. The Foreign Secretary joined Brexiteers, including David Davis and Jacob Rees-Mogg, in endorsing a rival blueprint for a clean break from Brussels. A Free Market Institute of Economic Affairs think tank, IEA, urged ministers to seek a basic free trade agreement for goods and pursue regulatory freedom and trade independence. It warned that Britain will squander a historic opportunity to broaden its horizons if Mrs. May sticks to her proposals. The launch of the report came as Mrs. May held what could be a stormy cabinet meeting in the wake of her humiliation at the hands of EU leaders in Salzburg last week. Some pictures of the various politicians involved following up. Anyway, the sessions has been called to consider a new post-Brexit migration rules, but some ministers are expected to make clear their unhappiness with Mrs. May's approach. Brexiteer cabinet ministers have played down claims that they are planning to quit at this stage. Mr. Johnson voiced his support for the IEA plan today, saying it was a good piece of work. It's a real alternative, he told reporters at his Oxfordshire home. And it actually is the alternative the PM originally wanted. It's a very exciting way forward. Mr. Johnson insisted the plan fix some of the difficult questions about how to maintain a soft Irish border. Mr. Davis, who resigned as Brexit Secretary over the Chequers plan, said it was time to reset negotiations. He said, "We're currently, bluntly, in a cul-de-sac. I'm afraid Salzburg was all too predictable. Now what we need to do is use the original commitments made back on March 7th by both Tusk and Barnier to go for an advanced free trade agreement." He later added, "My last instruction virtually to my department was to draft the legal text for a free trade plus arrangement so that you got it to work from. If you've got that to work from, the time spinning, time wasting activity of the European Commission, which we've seen lots over the last 2 years fail." Mr. Rees-Mogg, who led a powerful Tory backbench European research group, said, "So much of what we hear about these negotiations has been about managing decline, has been about what you have to have the least bad Brexit. This is about how you can have a fantastic Brexit that sets us up for the next generation and ensures our prosperity. This has been offered to us by the Commission. They have offered us the best trade deal they have ever done with any other country ever in the world. So if you want to call it Canada Plus or Super Canada or Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious Canada, that is what is being aimed and it's being offered." Mr. Rees-Mogg also hit out at those seeking for a second referendum on the UK's membership of the EU. Bloody hell. One sec. Just accidentally clicked another link. He said, "I'm afraid the Remainers who want another referendum hold democracy in contempt. They lost and they should grow up." The analysis by the Free Market Institute of Economic Affairs think tank urges the ministers to break the deadlock in negotiations with Brussels by seeking a basic free trade agreement for goods. Now, I'm going to leave this article as it is. I'll throw the Daily Mail link into the Discord group for people if you want to read it as well. But yeah, it's getting bad over here, to be honest. The whole concept of the Chequers plan has been roundly punched in the face repeatedly by anybody who's got any idea about economics. And this is proving to be quite problematic for the government. And a lot of people are just not going to sit by because they know that there are other people in other parties who are going to push them on this. And the only real solution as it stands at the moment is no deal and use free trade agreements through WTO, something like Canada, something like what other countries have with the EU. Do a proper negotiation under new terms as your own nation. That would be more beneficial than any other option that is currently on the table. But that's my view on the matter.
Yeah, again, I'll just have to go with your summary on this because I really don't know hardly anything about all of this. I'm like so wrapped up with what's going on in the US. I don't have like the emotional energy to worry about, other more things, more depth, and I don't know.
I can understand that, mate. But yeah, I mean, that's a particularly weird one, I think, for us at the moment. Is Brexit is the chance to actually break away from a federation that is completely undemocratic at its core and likes to pretend that it is the epitome of democracy when if anything, it's the epitome of bureaucracy, which is probably why the left loves it so much.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And that institution is something a lot of people over here are sick to death of. There are a number of reasons. Immigration is one of them, but it's only one. It's not the most significant, and it's not the one that most people actually care about. Um, but it is one that exists, and it must be recognized. And it also must be considered semi-valid if the people in the local area believe that such a thing as a border is valid. Then you must defend it. You can't have open borders and a welfare state and expect both to work. It never does historically. So why anybody would expect it to now, because reasons, is beyond me.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's still, I mean, it's just hard for me to get my mind around how entrenched it is that people believe in the EU as this great thing where, I mean, to me it's just obvious, why not break into smaller pieces, decentralize. And I would say the same about the United States. I think the US would be better off if the South had seceded, and probably if California was its own country, lots of things would be better off, I think. So,
Part of the reason why the EU exists is because it used to be a bunch of smaller nations that constantly fought each other because they needed extra resources and this, that, and the other. And in order to deal with the fallout of two world wars being begun in Europe, they needed some form of accords, they felt, to deal with this. The problem is that those accords weren't necessarily the best designed ones that could exist. The EEC was largely a union of nations to help keep Europe on the capitalistic front, uh, in alignment with what they were going to produce and use and make. And I mean, it's been the concept of the union itself has been around since before it actually came into existence. It was the EEC, then the EU. And it was that economic union that then became a more political union. And it's just very slowly grown, just like the US government in a way. You've had this slow ramp up that in recent years has exponentially escalated. So it was a few hundred million spent by the government, then a few hundred billion. Now we're at 20 trillion plus national debts with unfunded liabilities of hundreds of trillions of dollars. And nobody seems to think that the game is ever going to fall over because these numbers are too big. And that's exactly what will happen, and that's exactly what happens all the time. But unfortunately, we people don't learn from history very much. Unfortunate, as I said, it's quite unfortunate that they don't, but they don't. I can't say that they do. Or they deliberately try to repeat it, one or the other, thinking it'll be different this time because I'm a crazy person.
just like invading Afghanistan.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
never worked historically, but we'll try it again.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, again, there's not much one can do about these situations except highlight how stupid they are and basically try and bring them down with some reasonable discourse. Because all a revolution will do is make more of the same nonsense. It's kind of the clue is in the name. Things revolve. They don't improve. They just go round in circles.
Yeah, exactly.
Think it may be worth hitting up some comments now in chat. Um, as the DOJ cabal falls apart, along with the witch hunt, the left creates other scandals. How obvious is this? It is quite obvious. A lot of it is projection as well. There's a lot of people who the Me Too event, shall we say, has not properly castigated like Bill Clinton and others, but it's not something that we will see much reporting from. As Danielle Hatfield put it, don't look there, look here. The thing is that the remarks are not excusable under any circumstances, and numerous witnesses to the meeting say he said it. Yeah, and I don't know exactly where the activity for Kavanaugh is going to end and what is and is not true. It's going to be a bit problematic. And we'll see what happens in October. In a way, I'm glad that all the treasonous activity is coming to light. I have been patiently waiting since the inauguration for this to be revealed. We all have. We knew it would take time, those of us who've been following what has actually been going on in the backgrounds of the government and how the bureaucracy has been working against the interests of American people in favor of other nations or their own pockets. And it's been frustrating to deal with, but as I say, it is what it is at the moment, and the only way to fix this one is to root it out, root and branch, until it's gone. And unfortunately, I don't see that potentially happening anytime soon, but I could be pleasantly surprised. We'll see. Once he has met with the POTUS at the White House and he's on his way there, we should have something more definite. Yeah, this is on Rosenstein and his resignation / firing / God knows what the hell will happen next. It's not appropriate for the FBI to investigate these alleged events. That would have been for the law enforcement officials, if anyone. That was with regards to Kavanaugh, who should be responsible for any investigations into him. It would be helpful if they actually did learn history. Yes, it would be helpful if people learned history and not just what they read in their school textbooks, because half the time that's a biased form of propaganda that the winners have written 9 times out of 10. Archaeology teaches you more about history and its realities and what societies actually used to do and how things used to work and how they could work again if we chose to, and how they could work even better now because we have more advanced technology. Maybe the EU would do better going back to the EEC. Maybe. I think regression on that one wouldn't hurt, but I'll be honest, I think the EEC, the EU, the whole lot of them, they're a stupid form of protectionism. There is always a risk that a country or a local area or anything will suffer economically at some point in time. This is known. And it's not something one can avoid. It's something that we all have to just learn to live with and try to deal with if it starts happening to us. Usually you can do that by either moving, trying to sell off assets, basically port in a storm, as it were, for a lot of such issues. The main problem is the economic protectionism that is the EU doesn't actually improve the costs for those who live in the EU. It tends to create odd and often unintended consequences. Things like this country cannot produce this product because it's not Romania or it's not France. And because they're part of the EU, they're not allowed to produce a certain object or substance that this nation produces because of some agreement made 10 years ago before this country came into play. You've got all of this sort of historic protectionism hiding in there. The same thing also, there'll be huge tariffs for any imports that happen from outside the EU. So you'll get a large number of people basically who will want to trade with other nations and can't because the EU basically says they're not allowed to for whatever reasons. And it's that kind of principle that we're playing with here when it comes to talking about either the EEC or the EU. And unless you recognize that from the word go, it's not something that you can easily just say, oh, this is, we just need to revert it back. It's just going to come back to its political union state again, because the only way such rules and regulations for economic activity work is if you're unified politically as well. A large part of why they had the EU constitution is to define that, basically say this is to keep the economic union stable. We're finding it very hard to administrate it if everybody has slightly different ways of implementing it. And that's what you got to deal with when you have a multi-state partnership. That's what America learned it had to deal with a long time ago. And I still think it still hasn't worked out that lesson. Anyway.
Yeah, I got nothing to add to that.
That's fair enough. There's one big piece of news from Forbes that I think is worth covering as well today. Well, we've still got time, and that's a piece on artificial intelligence. Now, this is from a Paul Teich. I think that's how you pronounce it. Artificial intelligence can reinforce bias. Cloud giants announce tools for AI fairness. Now, be advised, I'm not 100% in agreement with this, but I do agree with the premise that is being put forward. And that's this. Unfairly trained artificial intelligence systems can reinforce bias. Therefore, AI systems must be trained fairly. Now, the problem is defining what fairly is. Experts say AI fairness is a dataset issue for each specific machine learning model. AI fairness is a newly recognized challenge. FYI, it isn't really that new. I'll explain why. The big cloud providers are in the process of developing and announcing tools to help address AI fairness. Facebook announced internal software tools development to search for bias in training sets in May 2018. Since then, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and most recently IBM have announced open source tools to examine bias and fairness in trained models. Is what these tools are designed to do and where they stand with respect to each other, and why IBM's trust and transparency announcement is important. The AI Fairness Challenge. The core challenge for AI is that deep learning models are black boxes. It is very difficult and often simply not possible for me humans to understand how individual training data points influence each output classification or inference decision. The term opaque is also used to describe this hidden classification behavior. It's hard to trust a system when you can't understand how it makes decisions. In the machine learning developer community, the opposite of opaque is transparent. Transparent deep learning models would expose their classification process in an understandable fashion, but research into creating transparent models is still in its very early stages. Again, it depends on your industry. In January 2018, a large group of Chinese organizations contributed to the white paper on artificial intelligence standardization. The white paper acknowledges ethical issues in AI without offering any remedies, saying we should be wary of AI systems making ethically biased decisions. For example, if universities use machine learning algorithms to assess admissions and the historical admissions data used for training, intentionally or not, reflects some bias from previous admission procedures, the machine learning may exacerbate these biases during repeated calculations, creating a vicious cycle. If not corrected, biases will persist in society in this way. White paper contributors include Alibaba Cloud, Baidu, China Telecom, Huawei, Intel China, IBM China, Tencent, and many more. I believe these organizations are also working to address bias and discrimination in training AI systems, but none have publicly announced tools yet. I'm going to skip forward a bit to IBM. A week after Google's What If announcement, IBM one-upped Google by announcing visual developer tools that work with any machine learning model. IBM's branded API OpenScale tools enable developers to analyze any machine learning model using any integrated development environment, or IDE. IBM also open sources machine learning fairness to the AI Fairness 360 toolkit. IBM containerized its machine learning toolchain using Kubernetes orchestration and can run it in any public cloud. Unsurprisingly, its AI OpenScale tutorials run in Watson Studio on IBM Cloud. Ultimately, the best answer for addressing bias and training machine learning models would be to build transparent models. But because we don't know how to do that yet, today's deep learning models are black boxes. Bias and fairness assessment tools therefore must examine each model's input dataset and then output inference results. I believe more tools will follow this path. For the time being, IBM's open source AI fairness toolset sets a good example by working with any type of model on any public cloud. This is to highlight who this is from. It's a principal analyst with Double Horn in a career focused on successfully commercializing technology-based products and services. Now, I've worked with large data sets for a large part of my career in advertising, and they are absolutely correct. If you have biases in your data, you create biased data as a result of inference. The whole point of inference, by the way, is a statistical concept. It's to take a small sample of people and from that extrapolate what they are likely to do, think, act, whatever your target is. In advertising, it's what they're likely to buy and what they're likely to be interested in and how to make their impression of a brand more favorable. Those are the three main objectives of any advertising campaign, and data is used to facilitate this. Now, in advertising, it's easy to know if it works or not. Did you make a sale? In practically any other form of analysis, it's much more fluffy and much more difficult to make any assessments on. And it's incredibly easy to bias, especially if your platform is already created bias. So with the likes of Facebook, Twitter, Google, they have been actively utilizing algorithms that use bias methods to try and filter out information in some way, shape, or form. This is how those algorithms that censor people randomly without consideration work. And that's why they work so badly. If you've got a model that basically just says, if it has this word in it, demonetize it, a huge number of people who may be criticizing the subject at hand or talking favorably about it, whichever, will all be penalized for just discussing this topic. And that doesn't add benefit to the discourse. It just makes people less likely to talk about that subject at all. Now, if that's your objective, bully. You'll help achieve it to some extent. But there will be other people like us that just won't care and will still talk about it. And you'll get people who migrate to those if that is what their interests are in. This is basic market economics. It's not complex. It's not something that requires deep and meaningful understanding of the world. It just needs you to understand the very basics of how people behave and to accept those things rather than to think, well, I can change them very easily, because you can't. It's gonna happen, and there's nothing you can do to stop that from happening. The only thing you can do is include all the data and base your models on everything that is available and look to see where you can find some piece of information given a number of data sets. That's the best way of creating any kind of AI, but it's also the hardest way to actually use data, because all statistical tools are designed currently to try and group people into meaningful data sets so that they can then be used for other purposes. And that dilemma of having to assess people as individuals while simultaneously assessing them as a group makes it very hard to get anything meaningful out of any kind of AI system. But a full-on AI that has to be unbiased, the only way to do it is give it access to everything and don't filter it. And the only way, and even then, there's no guarantee you won't get people adding fraudulent data in. And so you have to create some kind of method to get rid of that data. And there's so many complexities to the problem that it's one of those can we ever solve it scenarios. Is it something that is actually solvable? And a lot of people in computing have said there's no silver bullet for some of these types of issues. You can't fix all of these things in computer science and in big data, and that's why it's such a profitable field for people, because they're all trying to find that unknown way of best analyzing the information, and everybody has different strategies, and they work to different levels of degree, is about the best way of putting it. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's a big data science problem that they are now finally admitting exists. But I'm really surprised they're making out that this is new, because I knew that this kind of problem existed, oh Jesus, good 5 years ago. So why is this suddenly big information for people? I don't understand that at all.
Yeah, good. That's exactly what I was thinking. I don't understand how so many people cheerlead for getting, AI involved with, especially crime and identifying criminals and all of those types of things. And it's like, I mean, I don't understand how they can just see the biggest flaw that it all depends on, how these things are being programmed, and they're always liable to have bias within them programmed by these people in these companies that I would never trust to program AI that would be able to surveil and decide when something is amiss according to the government or whoever. So.
Precisely, and that's another part of the problem, is the definition of what is fair or what is biased. These are all very subjective terms. They aren't objective, and AI works best with very precise definitions, very well-tailored pieces of information that make it work. And it works brilliantly when you've got that. When you're dealing with something social, in any way, shape, or form, you're having to deal with multiple forms of ethics, multiple forms of morality, and none of them will 100% agree. And to claim that one is inherently better than the other, there may be objective measures to prove that, but not until they've been discovered fully. Any AI is going to struggle to work this out because we haven't worked it out, and we're building the damn things. But yeah, let's see if there are any comments in chat. The let's see. Can't expect disinterested oversight from those who to be overseen. We'll talk about somewhere else. So they're limiting portions of their prospective market. Brilliant. Unsolvable sounds about right. Yep. I mean, it is one of those there's a concept called a factorial in mathematics, where you take a number and you multiply every number underneath it until you reach 1. And this is represented by an exclamation point against the number or the variable. So n exclamation point means n times n minus 1 all the way down to the number 1. And that's how many combinations you wind up having to deal with when you're trying to work on some sort of value ethics problem, trying to work out what is the priority of an issue or an individual. And this is something postmodernism actually does discover, according to Jordan Peterson, is that there are so many groups that you can be clustered in, that there are more groups than actual people on the planet. So it makes more sense to just judge people as individuals rather than trying to do huge levels of iterative group analysis that really have no meaning in a real world scenario. You can divide any person into a ever descending list of groups of oppressor or oppressed, and it just doesn't work. Whereas with an individualist outlook, it's much more straightforward, but actually analyzing it with any meaningful information becomes much harder. And it's the same sort of principle with AI. You're trying to get one entity to understand practically everything. You're trying to create something that's omniscient in a lot of cases, and all-knowing and knowing how to act in a meaningful way. And I do think that people are going to bang their heads against this problem until somebody actually works out a way to analyze individuals irrespective of their groups. There may be technologies out there that can do that now. I'm not certain, but difficult to describe, to say the least. And it's important to try and utilize new methods. It may be a problem that we need to turn upside down effectively on its head using, I don't know, graph databases and things like that to make it work, where you're looking horizontally along the chain of action. I think that would have more success long term, but utilizing such systems is really hard. And trying to analyze those systems without bias is even harder. So, yeah, it's a very complex problem, and I really don't know if it is soluble. And finally, to finish it off, there are multiple forms of humor. Tell me how AI can understand humor. And no, I don't think AIs do. Semantic analysis rarely does. This is why sarcasm is so difficult for people to understand online when it's actually happening. And a computer just doesn't even bother. It just assumes it's not sarcastic, and therefore will flag it if it's something that could be considered remotely offensive. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not excited for the dystopic future of having computers decide if I'm being offensive or not, or whatever.
No, I don't think anybody is. And I think the sooner people realize that you can't make those kinds of value judgments so willy-nilly, the better. But we'll see what happens over the coming months. I mean, and there's rumors Trump's looking at a antitrust suit against big tech and all sorts of things coming out, which we'll be reporting on probably later this week, or potentially next week whenever they come to fruition. But there's a lot of rumors going around the mill. Let's see which ones actually turn out to be true. Anyway, that's the end of our broadcast today. I hope everybody here has a bad morning, and remember, as our founder would say, smash the state and fuck the system.
See you all tomorrow.
Have a bad morning, everybody.